needed to be portrayed how it was. So I'm going to get into that, I think, in like the second half, but like that is like a big thing, and it needed to end that way. It was so impactful. It was just rough to watch. And yeah, as you said, it's not for it. But I also think like, I think more people would like it than not. Like, I equate it to how I feel about Oreos, and we'll talk. I know that sounds very silly, but as I said, this film was a rough watch for me, not because of the quality of the content. It was amazing. It was amazing, especially after hearing you talk about it. I was like, no, yeah, even really just thinking about it, like, it was a great film. It was unique. It was well shot. It was creative. It was something I hadn't seen before. But it was hard to watch. And even the second time around, I realized like literally a day or so ago why. And that's because that's how trauma works. Where you get activated by something, you're like, oh, why do I feel like why do I feel like this? Ew. Get it out. And you don't really understand why at the time. Like sometimes, like some people are like really in touch with their emotions. I hope to get there one day. But most of the time I'll get activated with something and be like, I really wish I could understand why that happened. And then a few days later, I'll process it and I'll really think about it. I'll be like, oh, that's why. It's kind of, and I felt about this film, as I said, how I feel about eating Oreos. I don't enjoy eating Oreos. I like how they taste. I don't enjoy eating them because of the texture. And I think they taste good and people really love them. But for whatever reason, the texture makes my body feel weird. And so I don't like eating them. But I recognize that that is a unique experience for the most part and a reaction from my body. And not because there's anything wrong with Oreos.
Gotcha. I see.
You know, there's nothing wrong with this film. It's a great movie. But I wanted to crawl out of my skin multiple times.
Which, you know, is accurate. I feel like that's what you're supposed to feel.
Yeah, and it's necessary. Because, like, honestly, it made me think about a lot of stuff. And it's like, I thought it was very purposeful. Even though it was uncomfortable. It was very sometimes you have to feel uncomfortable. That's like how change happens. And that's the thesis of my section, is that like sometimes you got to look at the thing that hurts. Sometimes you got to look at the thing that's very uncomfortable, because that is like the only way to really know what you're dealing with and to heal from it and to deal with it authentically. You can't fight a threat. You don't know what it is. You know what I mean? Like, you need to know what you're dealing with so that you have the tools and the support and the structure in place to deal with it. And if you never look at it or talk about it, you're never going to have that. So that's why this film matters and is really good. But there are scenes, as I said, I just couldn't watch twice. I literally at one point I just got up and I was like, weren't you watching a movie? And I was like, yeah, it's still going. I'll go back in when I know it's done. When I know this part is done, because I remembered what it was. And it's because I empathize so heavily with Mia, as I was in her shoes at a similar age and handled that loss very similarly. Like, where Mia lost her mother, I lost my stepdad, and my way of coping was very similar. My attachment style was very similar. My self-isolation was very similar. The ending was different.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what's important, because I did have a handful of caring and supportive people that helped me get through that time. But like, it was like bar for bar outside of the psychotic break and injury to child, as well as like how it ended. That was pretty much similar. So if you trade out a ghost hand for alcohol, it's the same, as you said, it's a metaphor for addiction, you know? Yep. So
it's something to help you get through it.
Yeah. And it was hard to watch her fall. And it was hard, specifically extra, to watch the impacts of that fall on the people like she loved. You know what I mean? Like seeing the dad, seeing even like the brother, and being Riley. Like, oh, this poor baby, like, you know. So this film is deeply emotional on all fronts, and it covers heavy topics, which Gabe went over, and it just really focuses in on the unhealthy coping mechanisms, like especially isolated people can sometimes seek out because they don't have the support and structure in place, or even like the structures that they have, they don't know how to support them the right way. And that's not their fault necessarily, but we need to find a new way. And that's what I'm advocating for. This film, if it's a hard watch, it's a necessary watch. So Mia is grieving the loss of her mother and copes through this dangerous party game. She is described as needy and clinging, which when losing a loved one makes a lot of sense. When you realize the impermanence of life during a stage of life where you don't have a firm concept of time or the future, this can drastically affect and impact your attachment style. And like, if this is a movie about trauma and addiction, like they did it bar for bar, like it was really spot on into like what can happen if you don't look it in the eyes and say, hey, friend, I am worried about you. What are you feeling? How can I help? And it's just very common for the people around you, especially at that age, to not know how to help you through your grief. For other teens and peers who haven't experienced loss in this way, those emotions and that need for connection, that like desperation, can very much feel like a burden, or at the very least, like overwhelming, invasive, and stressful, like an attack to their situation. So when the boundaries that are pushed, you see it like throughout the film where Mia's pushing boundaries that are reasonable things to be upset about, but everyone feels really uncomfortable to mediate that conflict because of the heavy emotion behind them. They know they're dealing with loss. They don't know how to call it that, and say like, hey, are you experiencing the same things that your mother may have been experiencing? Are you experiencing the same thoughts that your mother may be experiencing? And they don't even have all the context because they don't know what happened, because that's something that's hidden by the dad. So it's like there's just so much happening that makes this so complicated and so accurate.
She is failed by every person in her life, and absolutely she makes some terrible decisions. But I think like her father keeping that from her, and I get that he's trying to protect her, but that was like one of the most harmful parts of that, because she never got closure and she never got to fully understand. And because then you're left guessing. So she doesn't even get the letter that says, this wasn't you. This was just something that happened to me because of where I was, but it has no bearing on my love for you. And she was denied that reality to the point where she couldn't believe it anymore.
Yeah, she had to fill in the gaps, and her brain coped how it did. There was too much time in between the event and the closure of that notice, and it was just so rejected after that. So there's a few things I'm going to unpack in my section. One being the ways in which loss can impact the still developing brain. Trauma impacts, and the teen brain is unique. And there's still a lot of research being done around that's like ever changing, just like there's still a lot of research being done about trauma that's ever changing. So I'm going to unpack a little bit of that. It's super interesting. And then second, how loss can impact a family structure, which we see play out like honestly very accurately in the film for probably a lot of the world, unfortunately. And why in loss, we may feel compelled to reach the other side quicker than those who have not yet experienced that. And when we don't call it what it is, how we might not even realize that's what we're doing until it's too late. So the developing brain and the impact of loss. So Talk to Me centers on teenagers who are still in high school, not like Bias where they're in college. It's different, and that difference matters a lot. I think it's really important that they chose teenagers to work with as like the playground for this horrible situation, because the teenage brain is unique in that there's just a really unique way that teenage brains manage memory and time. And this is a big strength of the teens, in that they're adaptable to change and then more like any other age bracket, but it also can have really negative impacts when dealing with trauma without a strong support system. So in a pamphlet titled The Teen Brain Still Under Construction from the Behavioral Institute, they unpacked research around the developing teen brain, and they say genes, childhood experiences, and the environment in which a young person reaches adolescence all shape behavior. Adding to the complex picture, research is revealing how all these factors add in the context of a brain that is changing and with its own impact on behavior. A clue to the degree of change taking place in the teen brains comes from the studies in which scientists did brain scans of children as they grew from early childhood through age 20. And the scans revealed unexpectedly late changes in the volume of gray matter, which forms the thin folding outer layer of the cortex of the brain. The cortex is where the processing of thought and memory are based. And over the course of childhood, the volume of gray matter is in this cortex increases and then declines. A decline in the volume is normal at this age and is in fact a necessary part of maturation, essentially. So the assumption for many years had been that the volume of gray matter was the highest in very early childhood. You learn everything when you're a baby. You learn everything when you're a little kid. That's why you're so full of energy and you're go, go, go. And then it gradually fell as the child grew. But now recent research shows that a high point in the volume of gray matter occurs during early adolescence. While the details behind the changes in volume on scans are now not completely clear, the results push that the timeline of brain maturation into adolescence and into young adulthood. So essentially it pushes that timeline much further, where the teen brain is still doing so much changing. So in terms of the volume of gray matter seen in brain images, the brain does not begin to resemble that of an adult until the early 20s. And the scans also suggest that different parts of the cortex mature at different rates. So specifically, areas involved in more basic functions mature first. Those involved, for example, in the processing of information to form senses, control movement, etc. And the parts of the brain that are responsible for more top-down control, controlling impulses and planning ahead, the hallmarks of adult behavior, are among the last to mature. So that's why the early 20s is a mess. Forgive yourself, friends.
You are growing.
Yeah, you didn't have anything in your brain yet that's like, maybe I don't do that. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I don't do that thing.
Bad things.
Yeah, there's a future. You know what that is? I care about 10 years from now. Their brains don't know how to do that yet. And that's a strength and a weakness. It depends on the life that you're handed. It depends on where you're born and the situations with which you are experiencing. Because there's a way where that can be like really positively impactful if you have good friends and a strong social structure that like encourages you not to harm yourself. You know what I mean? So the heavy things that these teenagers are dealing with were all impacting their brain's development, their relationships, and how they view themselves as being safe in the world. And while the brain is considered plastic in terms of the current trauma research, meaning it can heal from the impacts of trauma, trauma during such a crucial and tumultuous time in one's life can be especially damaging, especially when the adults around them are not present for them in the way that they need. And when peer groups aren't providing safe social outlets. The age brackets are more specifically because these age brackets, those teen years, are more likely to make riskier decisions when that is the social norm of their peers. So if you're having party friends and that's the expectation, you're more likely to binge drink, you're more likely to do drugs. Like, it's just because you don't have a concept of 10 years from now what that'll do to your body. It's like the kid who's sitting on the curb and he's like, how long do you think it takes till this gives me cancer, holding the cigarette?
Yeah.
Do you think it's right away or do you think it's later? So yeah, this age bracket is more likely to make riskier decisions, and they're also more likely to fall into situations that can mortally injure them. Like statistically, more teenagers die than any other age demographic from like injury, like falling off of things, not making smart choices, essentially. Yeah. And essentially, in many ways, the teens in the film did not have the brain capacity to fully understand the danger and the permanence of their actions. Given a different environment and with different supports, Mia may not have had this outcome / ending because, like, there are positives to this brain's adaptability and change. You can have this influence you positively. So in another article titled What Neuroscience Tells Us About the Teenage Brain on apa.org, they say the adolescent brain was long portrayed as broken, immature, or contributing to problematic behaviors. This was said by Eva Telzer, PhD in psychology of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And they continue and they say, but in the last 5 years, there's been a huge shift towards seeing the developing brain as malleable, flexible, and promoting many positive aspects of development and adolescence. They specifically list like instances of like, if their friend groups are activists, like being really into social change and like going to protests and shaping the world around them in like a positive way. Or it's like if their friends are really into like self-sustaining the world, you know, like it depends on like what their peer group is into. And like arguably, it seemed like Mia's peer group actually wasn't actively partying. They sought that out because of the trauma that they're experiencing. But I think the issue is that more people weren't watching them.
Yeah, I also think it's like, it's similar to Bodies, 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 where they were doing all those drugs in front of Sophie, even though she was in recovery. I think they were doing all these dangerous things in front of Mia, who was very vulnerable. And no one was thinking about her, taking care of her.
Yeah. Especially, yeah. So the verdict when looking at this research and the way trauma overlaps with the developing teenage brain is that teens are deeply impacted by their peers and support systems. So when their support system is not present, or even when their support system is not authentically present, for example, Mia's support system not remembering their mom's death anniversary, as Gabe said, she was alone. And the impact of that. And then Mia's father retreating into himself and his own grief and So not able to be there for her in the way that she needed as his child, like, and that's not to fault him. People grieve differently, but they grieved in really conflicting ways. And it was just super damaging to her brain. So escape as a coping mechanism can be especially damaging for someone so vulnerable. So as you said, they were doing all the stuff around her, not considering how that would impact her. And like, I get it. Adults are just grown-up kids. It's hard to know everything to do. I'm just hoping that, like, if you watch this movie or if you've experienced something like this, you can learn and grow from it by, like, knowing that we need to talk about these things so that people have the tools that they need to survive and move past them. And essentially, all of these vulnerabilities just increase her risk factors for addiction and mental health issues, but these things aren't inevitable. So how loss can impact a family structure. Loss has a deep impact on the family structure as well, where sometimes the grieving process of one family member may act in harm to another loved one's coping process. Like me and my mom, totally different ways of grieving. Totally we're not compatible. And that's fine. It is what it is. You can't change it. Luckily, we came out the other side. But sometimes it is the parent's responsibility to, like, help navigate that. And if you don't know the skills, we need to seek out help, therapy, other parental groups that are support systems. Like, they all should have been talking more. And because it's so hard to unpack these subjects, it just kind of got buried. And that's where, like, the issue kind of lies. So what we see in this film is that Mia and her father grieve in conflicting ways, and that deeply damages their relationship. The loss of one parental figure is a quick way to parentify a child. That's also a thing that happens. Like, she really has to take care of herself and like self-isolates because he's needing to take the time he needs to grieve his wife and her mother,
Yeah. And she clearly doesn't trust him.
Yeah, because there's a denial of that trust and him not given the whole story, So the two grieved in isolation from each other, Mia needing to talk about it and needing the affection and connection from the experience, like needing to grieve together, needing like that connect. She was exhibiting like this need for connection with all her other friend groups because she wasn't getting that from like the absence of her mother, but also her father. And Mia's father needing to just keep going. Some people just need to like go back to work after they lose somebody, not everyone needs to talk about everything, but sometimes your coping mechanism might conflict with somebody else's. So the not talking about is what actually happened, was causing his heart and mind and struggling to accept it, and it was also hard for a parent to know what's appropriate to tell the child, as you said, Gabe, like for the child's own good, like out of intended protection. Sometimes parents will withhold information that is essential to the healing process because they don't think they're old enough for it, or they just don't know how, they don't even have it like wrapped around in their own minds. So they don't know how to communicate it to someone younger than them. Like it's all well-intended, but it just had so much harm. So unknowingly, this information can be the thing that the child needs to cope and heal. As you said, it's like the thing they needed for closure. Yeah. And it would have helped establish trust between the two of them. But the lack of clarity around the loss of Mia's mother and the feeling of deceit surrounding, like, she knew something was up and that he wasn't telling her. And that just made her immediately not trust anything that he would say. Yeah. It gave too much space for Mia's developing brain to fill in the blanks of that loss. Her mind actively floundering to cling to something that felt less awful. And it also impacted Mia's coping mechanism, seeking escapes from the information, as that was what was modeled to her. Her dad was escaping. So she's like, that's how we deal with hard things.
We don't talk about it.
We don't talk about it. We run away. And when years later presented with the truth of her mother's suicide, it was an attack against all of her emotional barriers that she had built up out of necessity to protect herself. And that's why she couldn't accept it. It was too late at that point.
And he was kind of using it as a weapon too. Yeah. And I don't think he even noticed, like, he didn't realize that was the problem. Because when she was like, you're holding things back, then he was like, oh, wait, maybe I should tell you. And he was like, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you. I don't know why I didn't. But it did feel like I have to do this because I'm losing you. And you finally told me that that's what you need. But it's a little too late.
And it's also like his coping mechanism was also just like an absence from what reminded him of his wife, which was her. And she needed him. And it's just, it hurts. It hurts. It's okay. And this isn't to fault the father, as I said, like, who was just grieving himself and doing the best he could. Like, I don't think he was doing any of this maliciously.
No.
This is the whole impact over intent thing, where sometimes just life happens how it happens, and you're the villain in someone's story. I don't know. It sucks. It sucks because the ending just hurts. But it's an example of how trauma can isolate a family. Like, this was perfectly done. How concealing the truth of a suicide can actually damage the grieving process of the child impacted and damage the connection of the remaining parent and child. If we don't look at the problem and call it what it is, we are creating a space for that problem to repeat, which is what happens in this film. We're removing the collaboration and support necessary for healing. We are removing the protective factors that can help a developing mind recognize the signs in their own body and mind that something isn't right. We're removing a safe space to convey that feeling to their loved ones. That's why when approaching suicidal ideation, an essential piece is of preventing it is to call it out, name it, so that you can protect the people with those thoughts. Be like, hey, are you having suicidal thoughts? And if they are, that's okay.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with you.
There's nothing wrong with you. Like that. Life is hard. Like logically, sometimes suicide does seem like the better choice when under capitalism and oppressive systems. But it's not the better choice when love comes into play. And you have to call that out. Like sometimes life is hard for a period and you just have to wait it out. And it's okay to feel that way. The most important thing is that you're not making a plan to act on it and know that I am here for us to talk about this and you are not too much and you matter to me, and you not being here, I don't want to be in a world where you're not here anymore. You know what I mean? And that like that connection matters and that I'm going to authentically show up for you. You don't have to deal with this by yourself. That's what you need to say in those situations. Yeah. And that's not what was said. And that's why these kind of things, like statistically, unfortunately, do perpetuate when you have that experience. It's like you need to unpack these emotions. You need to validate those feelings. And the reasons for having them and to provide next steps that aren't not being here anymore. You know, it is to create a space where someone feels safe enough to tell you that they're having those thoughts or even just unsafe thoughts in general so that they can get the help they need to get through it. So not talking about the problem just allows it to grow like mold under the floorboards until the foundation of the person you love crumbles under the weight of life struggles. I thought that was pretty poetic.
It is. And sad.
And very sad. Yeah. So why in loss we may feel compelled to reach the other side quicker. So when dealing with the death of a parental figure or just anyone, like just dealing with loss, loss is hard, but especially like suicide, there are a lot of statistics that are pretty damning. I honestly don't encourage you to look at them. It's sad. To lose a parent to suicide drastically increases the chance of the child following the same path. It is something that because of the fact that people don't talk about it, there's such a stigma. There's so much playing into that. There's similar statistics that exist for addiction and mental health issues. And my personal thoughts on this, I am biased. I will fully claim that I am biased. This is my personal thoughts as someone who was personally impacted by both of these things in my adolescence and my life. So like I'm speaking personally from opinion. This is what I wished happened in the world and would have hopefully we can't change the past. Life happened how it did, but these are my personal thoughts on it. But because these things are so stigmatized, these things are in society that we create a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. American society dehumanizes addicts so much that many addicts never seek help because of the perception around it. We label addiction by the end stages of it without recognizing the initial signs and stages that lead to it, to the point that some people who are exhibiting addictive traits don't even recognize that that's what they're doing until it's too late, till they're drinking at like 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. You know what I mean? They don't realize that when you take it out of the social situation like Mia was doing with the hand, how quickly that can spiral out of control when it becomes a coping mechanism instead of a fun social thing you do with friends. It's different. Addiction looks different and people don't really talk about it enough for people to recognize their own signs in their own bodies and lives. Like there was a period of time where I was drinking a lot. And I didn't realize that that's what I was doing as a coping mechanism and not because I was just having fun with friends. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's just different. And we don't talk about it enough, essentially. So there is also the way that addiction is treated based on race and gender. There's a lot of ways that mental health and grief are even handled differently based on race and gender. So many families just don't speak about the addicts in their own families, removing their ability to help the next generation avoid the same fate. We're removing the ability, it's representation at the end of the day. We look to media for representation, so it helps us see who we are. If we don't have representation of healing or even the loss, we don't look at it for what it is. How do we know how to prevent it in the future? So the problem's hidden away, and the reminders of it are dismissed or deemed too much. And this doesn't solve the problem. It just allows it to grow, creating unhealthy coping mechanisms, isolation, and escapes. And when dealing with loss, it is natural to miss the people you've lost and feel pulled to be with them again. And that's not talked enough about either. Like generally, like lots of people will experience loss and be like, we'll never talk about it again. Yeah. They didn't exist because it hurts. And that some people do need that for a time, but that can't be forever is more so what I'm saying. Because the unfortunate reality is that sometimes this can be done unconscious or subconsciously too. As well, like when you don't have the context to name it, you're experiencing and dealing with, like you don't have even the ability to recognize that that's what's going on with you. So what would have changed this film, and I'm going to try to link some resources in the blog for like addiction recovery and suicide prevention and stuff like that. But what Mia didn't have was the calling it out, the support systems. And these are all things that you can be in the world, friends, listeners. We can be that for each other. And it all starts with like looking at yourself and your history and being like, these are the things my family doesn't talk about. Why don't we talk about media literacy, but for your life, self-analysis and like really unpacking like why and like how that's impacted you and like therapy, man, and then like when you're offering to be there for someone to show up authentically, allow it. As I showed Gabe my water bottle earlier, and I'm going to show you guys because I don't like the good vibes only thing. The whole spectrum of the human emotions is what we need to experience with each other. And that's okay to not be okay. And we need to make space for that because that's the only way people are going to heal and actually authentically feel safe in the world. And there are lots of resources that exist. There are programs that exist. And we need to recognize like how addiction actually looks and how we can recover from it and how there's tons of people in the world who like, honestly, like the anonymousness of it, there's a whole program, it's Addicts Anonymous, it's Alcoholics Anonymous, all those things, like it's all anonymous because no one wants to talk about it. And there's instances in which it's necessary to talk about it. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it really, there was a lot of that in this film. And that's what I really appreciated. I felt like it was doing both in a way that felt effective. I didn't feel like the horror movie aspect suffered because they were expressing some real life horrors. And I don't think the real life horrors were minimized in the face of horror. I don't think it was gratuitous. I don't think it was unkind or unrealistic or hurtful. Like I felt like it was really honest, and it hurt to watch and feel connected to it. And it's, again, it can be very triggering, but I think it was beautifully done. I think it's a great horror film. It's stressful. It's got great cinematography and acting. The performances are out of this world. And it just like, it is really sad and it ends really sad. And I think just what's really important to note is that you, like, if you're feeling similar, if you've experienced similar things, that your ending doesn't have to be that.
Yeah. It's not inevitable. No. It's not. It doesn't need to end that way. And a lot of the time, unfortunately, is wading through the water, treading water until the rescue boat comes, or even there till you find land yourself, and it's time matters. And it's hard when you're a teenager, and I get that because you don't have a concept of tomorrow. That's why this is so devastating to watch in this film. But you just got to make it. You just got to wait it out. And things do get better. As someone who previously did not want to be here and also struggled with addictive like things, it does get better. You eventually might want to be here.
Yeah.
I really didn't think I would, and I do, and that's crazy. I don't understand it. So I'm like, wow, I like being alive. What's that? I really didn't think I'd ever get to that. And, you know, and you do. Like, lots of people do. There are lots of success stories if you wait out the bad feelings and you have the support that you need. And even if you don't, like, just try to stay. Yeah. If you can.
Yeah. Try to stay. That really is it. Yeah. And
it impacts people ultimately.
It was a series of unfortunate events that led to her demise. It was just a lot of bad things after bad thing and just nothing there to catch her. While she was also drowning. It wasn't just the ghost that was attached to her. So yeah, I think I hope that when you watched it, you felt something. And if you didn't see these things, then I hope, like, when you rewatch it, maybe there's a different appreciation or care for it, a different appreciation for Mia and her father, and even Jade. Like, honestly, like, she, like, you don't always know what to do, and it's exhausting that, you know, you have to be the one person that's supposed to be taking care of this kid, who was while you're just trying to live your life.
Yeah, and you also, like, need your friend too. Like, you don't want to be alone. You need that connection too. Like, she wasn't.
It was like a one-way street.
Wrong. It was just, like, hard. It was a hard situation for a teenager to grapple with. Absolutely.
Yeah, and she had her own issues with her boyfriend. Yeah, she had a lot going on. Like, she was just trying to be her life. Yeah, you know, everyone was trying to do that, and it just sucked that this is the way that it turned out. But I think it's a brilliant film. It is the last Gen Z film that we're covering for this section. Next week, or next episode, because it won't be next week, will be Heathers. So we're going to be talking about a Gen X horror, and then we will be talking about a Gen Z horror that I found. I will say I do want to correct my call out. I still do want to hear from you all. But Kat had mentioned, and I forgot why we dismissed it, but Jennifer's Body is 100% the Gen Z horror that I was looking for. That's about the teenage experience.
You mean millennial, but yes.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry. Millennial horror that I was looking for that talks about the teenage experience. We just have already covered it twice, so we weren't going to do it series. No. But it absolutely counts. I'm still on the fence on whether or not Ginger Snaps and The Craft count as millennial. I'd say they're more cuspers of Gen X to older millennial. I absolutely identify with those instances. I just think they're a little older.
It's like how we
was right on the money.
Enjoyed watching New Girl, but it was a bunch of Gen X people in that show. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, we liked it. We related to a lot of it, but it was not made with specifically millennials in mind.
Yeah. It wasn't my experience, which is So just wanted to redact that Jennifer's Body counts, and if people were screaming Jennifer's Body at me, that is the answer. There, I'm sure, are more. I'd love to hear from you, but we are covering one, and it will not be Jennifer's Body, because again, we've already covered it twice. So would love to hear from you. What did you think of Talk to Me? I don't know. Are you excited? What films do you want us to cover? And don't get married.
Let your kids, and hopefully your kids are just like okay, and that they feel loved, and you're there for them as best as you can be.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for everybody. It's hard for all of us.
It's hard.
Existence is hard, and it's okay. I'm so glad you're here. I'd rather talk to you, like, hold your real hands than this ghost one.
Agreed.